on this one little tangent of the future of psychedelics, so engineering new psychedelics, can you comment on maybe the chemistry and the biology of how psychedelics work, and where is the space of possible engineering of psychedelics, and what kind of things might they unlock in terms of the possible places our mind would be able to go, and the effects of that of improving health, but maybe at the basic level of chemistry and the space of what could be engineered.
Well, you reminded me, it's not, I'll get to exactly what you said, but you reminded me of a talk I heard by Buckminster Fuller shortly before he died. Mm-hmm. And what he talked about is how technology was making things ever smaller. You know, that we are able to pack more and more information into smaller and smaller spaces, mm-hmm. and that we're developing technologies of communications with people. You know, we now know the internet and things like that. But what he said is that he thought the eventual evolution of this sort of research would move from this miniaturization to telepathy.
Yeah.
and so it was like a shocking thing for somebody like scientific like that to say that.
Yeah.
So will we unlock those parts where I talked about the collective unconscious? Will we be able to more consciously explore those areas? So I think that that's a possibility.
That's fascinating.
There was Stan Grof, who's the world's leading LSD researcher and has been my mentor. His wife Brigitte, they were talking about stories that they had heard about MDMA that people take, and then on top of that they do 5-MeO-DMT. And so you get this ego dissolution, but underneath it you have this sense of ego, sort of sense of self, of safety, of self-acceptance, kind of grounds it. So mm-hmm. Stan was like, that's the future of psychiatry. That you can watch without the terror of the ego dissolution, the sense that you're losing your mind or you're going crazy or you're dying, or, that you have this grounded sense of safety while you're dissolving your normal sense of how you see things.
And being able to engineer in a fine-tuned way that exact experience may be fine-tuned to the person, as opposed to sort of this manual potion that's through
well, I don't
experiment.
Yes. Although I don't know about fine-tuning things to the person in the sense that we believe there's this inner healer, this kind of inner healing intelligence. We talked about it. The body repairs itself. So I think we more need to create safety for people, and then what emerges will be customized to what they need to be looking at from this inner healing intelligence. At the same time, we will move to, we hear so much about the new approaches to oncology, where you do genetic analysis of different kind of tumors, and then you have certain kind of chemotherapy agents, and you do like personalized chemotherapy. I think we will have more like personalized psychedelic therapy, but it'll be more like a sequence of different drugs that people go through over an extended period of time, and then you kind of customize what's next. And sometimes you'll combine different drugs together, like this 5-MeO-DMT and MDMA, or a lot of times people do LSD-MDMA combinations or psilocybin-MDMA combinations. Chemistry and it's not my strength. I'm more into clinical applications and policy, but I can say that from what I've learned from reading from others and research done by others, that different psychedelics have an impact on different neurotransmitters, different other parts of energies in the brain. The default mode network is what's considered to be like our sense of self, and it's part of the brain that sort of is what I described before, scanning the world and filtering information for what's really important to us, and both focusing us on things and also helping us to ignore a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And the classic psychedelics all weaken the energy in this default mode system, and therefore you get this flood of information that you're not normally paying attention to, and then you start seeing in more creative waves or more connected. You actually move to beyond the verbal kind of thinking into sort of symbolic thinking a lot of times. And that's where you sometimes get these mystical sense of connection, how it's all one. And you get this sense also of how big the universe is and how small each one of us is. So there's a lot of work that Sasha Shulgin and Albert Hofmann, who invented LSD and first synthesized psilocybin, on what they call structure-activity relationships. What is the structure of the molecule? And then how do you predict what that new molecule that never existed before is going to do once you actually take it? And you can get close, but you never really know until you actually take the drug. And the way that Sasha ran his experiments is that he would take the drugs himself first in low doses, and he would sort of, step up the doses to have more experiences. If he thought it was valuable, he'd share it with his wife, Anne. But then what they would do is, if they both thought it was valuable, they had a group of 12 people that they were with for many, many years. And they would distribute these new drug to these 12 people, and they would get the different perspectives. And he felt that 12 was like a minimum number, because we're so unique how each of us see things. But then you kind of get a little bit of a consensus on how a lot of people are going to see it. And then if that 12 people were positive about it, then they would turn it over to Leo Zeff, who we called the secret chief, the leader of the underground psychedelic therapy movement, and then he would start exploring it in therapy. So there's still a lot of mysteries as far as structure-activity relationships, and it's not going to be the case that people go into the lab and they tinker with molecules and they know exactly what they're going to get. And a lot of it has to do with the not so much chemistry as morphology. You could say the shape of the molecule and how does that interact with receptor sites. And so we're getting better at modeling all of that.
And how does that interaction relate to the morphing of the human experience, and deeply understanding that perhaps there's no equations yet for that kind of thing? You really have to build up intuition by experiencing it. And over time, and through sort of subjective self-report, like trying to build an understanding of the effects of the different chemistries.
Yeah. You can have approximate ideas, but to know exactly. So, when I first tried MDMA, which was 1982, and this was after I had done lots of LSD and mescaline and mushrooms, I was shocked at how different it was than these other substances, and yet how profound it was. So are there whole new kind of categories of classes of drugs that we're not aware of that would be not so much this like eco-dissolution or emotional? Well, what MDMA does is reduces activity in the amygdala, the fear processing part of the brain. So it's not just chemistry, but it routes energy throughout the brain in a different way. It increases activity in the prefrontal cortex, so you think more logically. That I think has an enormous impact on the effect of MDMA. The other thing it does is it increases connectivity between the amygdala and the hippocampus. So it helps facilitate processing of things into long-term memory. And with PTSD, trauma is like never in the past. It's always about to happen. So will we one time develop drugs that would even be specific to certain kind of memories? We're working with a woman, Rachel Yehuda, who is at the Bronx VA, and she's done some studies that are with the epigenetics of trauma. So she's worked with Holocaust survivors and their children, and she has identified epigenetic mechanisms by which trauma is passed from generation to the generations.
Wow.
Sort of like set points for anxiety, fear, certain things like that. But the question is, can you actually transmit memories from one generation to the next? Now, this is not DNA changes which happen over a very long period of time and the evolutionary scale. But within one lifetime, within some experiences, your epigenetics, what turns on the genes or turns off certain genes, that can be impacted. And that's what we know now can be transmitted from generation to generation, either by the father or the mother through the sperm or the egg. So it's pretty remarkable. So what Rachel's going to try to do is MDMA research for PTSD and look at these epigenetic markers before and after and see if they change as a consequence of therapy. So will we develop one day certain kind of chemicals that will be able to bring certain kind of memories to the surface? That's not inconceivable.